welcome everybody to the session Accelerating Global Digital Economy. My name is Winston Chan, and I'll be moderating this conversation. So as you know, technology has many impacts in our daily lives, in our businesses, in our communities, in our institutions. And as you know, since the pandemic, this transition to the digital economy has been accelerated, and G20 governments around the world are looking into it to see how this can contribute to the economic recovery. So to talk about what is the digital economy and what are the current trends, we will have 4 panelists that will discuss about this matter. First, I would like to introduce you to Wim Dont, Principal at Roland Berger Canada, Ritika Rana, Senior Manager at Nordicity, Chris Pereira, CEO at the Canadian Ecosystem Institute, and Morgan Elliott, Vice President, Government Affairs at Huawei Technologies. Welcome. So we're going to start with Wim. Nice to have you guys. So we're going to start with Wim Dont, Principal at Roland Berger. Wim, what's your take on the whole digital economy right now in this current pandemic situation right now?
Well, thanks, Winston, and it's a pleasure to be here. So obviously this, everything changed after March 12th. So we're seeing obviously an enormous boost around the digital economy. I think everybody pretty much moved online, obviously at the detriment of a lot of the physical interaction that we're all kind of living through. But I think one of the key things that we've noticed globally is obviously the utility, like importance of the digital infrastructure supporting the digital economy. So we've seen obviously a lot of reinforcements required to make sure that we stay online, that we keep buying, we keep consuming, we keep entertaining ourselves, we keep kids in school, and we've seen a lot of importance of keeping that infrastructure alive, keeping it up and running, enforcing it, and actually driving the economy as we come out of this COVID situation. So happy to be here and happy to take a couple of questions later on.
Well, thank you very much, Wim. So we're going to have Ritika Rana, Senior Manager at Nordicity. Ritika, what's your take on this situation right now?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. The situation is interesting, because with the broken supply chains, we were thinking of getting into deglobalization, but this is digital technology is one thing which is going to keep alive globalization. At least in services, we can have these countries connected, people connected through digital technology. So I think this is one driving force which would keep the world globalized and would keep triggering economic growth. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So Chris Pereira, so what is your take?
Yeah, thanks, Winston. Just as previous to guest just mentioned, I think since March we faced a lot of challenges with taking on a new way of doing business, and in a lot of ways it's meant how do we start using technology in different ways and really pivot to trying to provide value in a different way. And I'd like to sort of point out a few things from my past experience, having lived in China for 15 years and living and working there in different capacities. And I think one really important thing to focus on is enabling the young generation to receive more mentorship, receive more supportive policies, and access to investment for those young people starting the small and medium-sized enterprises. Are what will really help the economy and employment really take back some momentum from what has been lost since COVID. And I think on top of that, finding certain clusters of talent, organizations, and investment, such as in Vancouver for startups and creative enterprises, and places like Montreal with AI, focusing on how we can really foster the younger generation is something I think policy should focus on.
Thank you, Chris. Morgan, so what is your take on that?
Well, I really think we're at an intersection in time that we've not seen before. And I'm not saying anything that people haven't discussed in the past, but we're just really upending business models. We're being forced to work in different manners. We're forced to connect with our own personal friends in different ways too, as well. So there's a lot of interesting, aside from that, public policy issues that I think the globe as a whole is really grappling with. We've seen a move away from deglobalization and a splitting of different technologies, sort of a technology Berlin Wall, for lack of better terminology. And we really have to come to grips of how can we bring along industry and how can we bring along governments that enable business to continue to what they do, and that's create value for the economy, create jobs, and create stable global economies. But we're really, the public policy issues, as I say, are really unique and upending models that we've traditionally believed in. And we really don't know where this is going. So we're all going to be struggling through this together.
Oh, thank you. Wim, so I think you did a lot of work on artificial intelligence around the world. I think in North America, in Europe. So what is the current situation on this aspect? Can you tell more about this?
Yeah, so I think Roland Berger has the opportunity to kind of work, in a lot of technology areas. I think we see artificial intelligence as one of those enablers to make us work much more efficiently overall, but also, as we move into more of a distributed working fashion, that intelligence, in the infrastructure will be critical. So I think we believe that artificial intelligence is going to be one of those building blocks that's going to be critical to digital economy. At least making that efficient, making that cost effective. And these are two obviously key terms. Is that this needs to be efficient, this needs to be cost effective, this needs to be secure. And then all that requires on, how do we do this in a smart way? So in terms of what we've been doing around AI, we've been helping larger organizations evaluate AI as an enabler, but we've been also helping startups actually, position their technology in as the right enabler and building block.
Thank you, Wim. Ritika, so what is your take on this? I think you did a lot of work also on telecommunications. So how do you see that, the current situation?
Yeah, for sure. We did a lot of work, and because I'm an economist by training, I've always been very interested in measuring the economic value of digital economy. So we generally know that the digital economy consists of economic activities that are powered by digital computing technologies, but there are two main aspects to the activities, and both in terms of economics. First, one which is accounted for in the calculation for GDP, and the other one which is not accounted for in the calculation of GDP. I'll briefly talk about these two. So the one which is accounted for basically has three broad categories. The digitally enabled infrastructure, where you include all the ICTs, hardware, software, and support services. Telecommunications is also a part of it. Then digitally ordered transactions, or e-commerce as we say it. And finally, the digitally delivered products, which are transmitted and consumed in digital format, like you'll have digital books and videos and financial services. Now, these are the ones which are accounted for and in the GDP. And what we have seen so far, the global trends have been that digital economic activities have grown faster than the overall economy for sure in Canada. Digital economic growth is more than 4 times that of the total economy. Telecommunications has emerged as a largest contributor to it, and e-commerce is growing very fast. Now, going on to the other aspect of digital economy, which is not accounted for in the national accounts. It's the utility which is generated by free digital goods and non-market goods. Most of us derive a lot of value from these free digital goods. Search engines, maps, emails. And they are not accounted for in the GDP just because there is no price paid for these services. So the value created, for example, by social media, it only comes from the advertising revenues. But if you go and ask people who have been using social media and tell them from tomorrow onwards, you'll not be able to access them for free and you might have to pay for it, it would be safe to assume that they'll be willing to pay some amount for it. So in economics, we do what we call as choice experiments, where, we go and ask people whether they would be willing to pay for these free services. And some research estimates have come up and have shown that, for example, Facebook is the consumer surplus, which is generated by Facebook, is approximately 3 times of what is reflected through average revenue per user, which is what is accounted for. There are other considerations also, which are not accounted in GDP, which are the positive externalities and the negative externalities that the digital economy creates. Positive in the sense that you're happy, you're connected, you're satisfied. Negative in the sense that, there is loss of privacy and there is some social unrest in certain countries because of this. And of course, the time you spent also has an opportunity cost, and the data you provide also has a cost to it. So what we see, digital global economy as of now is much larger than the dollar figures that are used to represent it. And it definitely adds more value than the current measures indicate.
Thank you. Chris, so I know you've been working a lot with students and young people. What's your take on the question of talent and the whole digital economy right now?
Yeah, thank you, Winston. I think there's 3 important things that really are needed to accelerate the digital economy for young people and really help them engage in a meaningful way in the economy. So growing the digital economy means we need to be aware that with technology also comes disruption. And I'm sure we're all quite aware of some of that disruption this year, but we also need to remember it's a longer-term trend in the economy, and some industries are going to move towards the digital economy sooner than others. And when there is a disruption, there will be a greater need for strong policy support, especially for young people, and small and medium-sized enterprises are also part of that. So I think mentorship is important, and that includes having the ecosystem in place to support the individuals and companies to successfully apply these new technologies. So finding the first movers who can lead the rest of the industry into successful application of a technology is important. Also, there's more policies are needed to support startup investment, including is what's being done with 5 superclusters in Canada is a good example, especially the digital supercluster here in Vancouver. Those sort of organizations that really center the effort and talent and investment and ideas into certain pockets of the economy, and those can then radiate out into the rest of the country. So we're also, I think, if we want to help young people succeed in the digital economy, we also have to have more insights about where technology is going, more ideas about how smaller enterprises can really apply those leading edge technologies, because it's not often cheap to apply AI, for example, for a startup or a young person just graduating from university who has an idea, but not necessarily the expertise for how to do that is. I think there's a lot of potential there for Canada to show young people first the trends, but also how to actually apply these technologies. And like I mentioned at the end, just one final point is it's a long-term trend, and some industries are going to get there sooner than others, and I think it's important that we don't force something that's not ready in the economy also.
Well, thank you, Chris. So Morgan, so you've been in the deep dive in this digital economy. What's your take on that?
I want to pick up on a point that Ritika made regarding the economic analysis and specifically the intangibles that are hard to measure. And I guess I'll try to be a little bit controversial and throw out an idea that the technology world, technology companies as a whole, have done a terrible job trying to equate or communicate the value proposition to governments across the globe. And part of that reason is you're actually seeing a transition from I guess older school economy politicians to a newer, younger generation that have been immersed in digital technologies in all their lives and actually understand the value proposition. But I really do think it's incumbent in the current climate that technology companies across the globe really explain and really, try to remove some of the marketing terms and just sit down and do deep dives with politicians and public policymakers across the globe to really understand what's happening and where things are going. And at the same time, I think it's also incumbent upon the policymakers to open themselves up for those types of conversations. Technology companies, we've been focused on building product, creating ideas, implementing new ideas, and we really haven't spent enough time trying to educate policymakers across the globe.
Thank you, Morgan. So since we're talking about the policy making, so Wim, I'd like to know what are the policies the government should implement to foster digital economy?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think one thing that we clearly see is when taking Ritika's breakdown into what the digital economy means is policy goes on a bunch of different levels, right? So we're talking about e-commerce, digital goods, infrastructure, right? I think in Canada or North America, obviously every market moves at different paces. We all know that our telecom market in Canada is maybe not the most flexible one. And when we kind of look at the breakdown in terms of where the growth has been in kind of digital economy, we've probably seen least growth around the telecom space because it's a fairly regulated market. We know it's neatly divided between a couple of large players, and obviously we're not the most dynamic in that area. So how do we open that up? How do we open this market to more dynamic services? It kind of shying a little bit of the word more competition. We know that's a very controversial part in Canada. The other part is also, when I start looking at digital services, I know that we're starting to see the uptake of Netflix and all that. We're starting to tax these services. We're starting to understand the impact of these services and the opportunity. We're moving in the right direction there. The other part is also, if you start seeing some of our recent Canadian expertise around Lightspeed, obviously making Shopify our national champions. They're in that e-commerce space. We're doing a heck of a job there. So if you start thinking about where the growth sits in Canada around digital services, digital economy, it's in those dynamic areas. So the question is, how do we start making our other parts of the digital economy much more dynamic? Maybe loosen some of the reins, or maybe find the right ecosystem to kind of drive a little bit more dynamism in that market.
Thank you, Wim. Ritika, so what would be the policies you recommend for governments to implement for a better digital economy?
Well, there are several, but there's one thing, because coming from the point what Wim put forward, the competition, and I know it's very, it's a complicated issue here. Why? Because telecommunications, I'll start with telecommunications and then go on to these big tech firms, the digital firms. The telecommunication is kind of industry which actually invests a lot. It has it has to keep up with the accelerated pace of technological progress, inter-industry interactions, and keeping pace with ever-evolving consumers' preferences. You have huge spillover. It generates externalities, and that results to some scale issues where the incumbents are favored with their ubiquitous networks. Now, because this is inherent in the industrial structure, yes, of course, the government policies are needed to regulate that and to introduce competition. But what we are seeing right now is, emergence of this big tech. Big tech, big tech is like small group of digital firms, that dominate the 21st century. And they have been criticized for election manipulation, violating privacy, and abusing their digital monopolies. Right, there are reports where Google has been charged for making exclusionary contracts with smartphone users. There were issues like there was some concentration of power in cloud monopoly, but we see a lot of companies now coming in offering their cloud services. So yes, some kind of regulation is required, but that does not have to be around to accuse that there is less competition, because of course there will be less competition in some services and there will be more competition in the others, as I said. What regulators need to make sure is that they have to be vigilant that companies' data or the privacy of the consumers, their data, everything is controlled for. It is not being leaked. It is not being used for maybe practices like manipulation of elections and stuff like that. So data privacy is something that I think policy is required there, and it has to be stringent.
Thank you, Ritika. Chris, so what's your take on that?
I think Ritika is very wise in pointing out the importance of competition and also the complexities behind that. So the real focus for me, I think, going a little deeper into competition and how the market in the digital economy operates. As we all know, tech has been a real realm of young people. If you look at companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, all of these companies have average ages in the mid-20s for their employees. And I think we should recognize that a lot of that innovation does come from young people, and how to keep that happening in a year when we need innovation and new ideas to get things running again. I think the policies should definitely focus on helping getting more young people into entrepreneurial activities and doing more innovative work in the economy. So recognizing those people through supportive measures and encouraging young people, even at the high school level, maybe to think about what they want to do in the future if they have ideas. And on top of that, I guess small and medium-sized enterprises are hurting and struggling to first survive this year, but also on top of that, they need to invest in new technology to even survive. So finding ways to support that aspect of business is also important. And like I mentioned before, as part of that, if we focus on certain clusters of technology and companies that can enable small and medium-sized enterprises to apply that technology, I think that we could seed some of the seeds for future success in Canada.
Thank you, Chris. Morgan, so what are the policies governments should implement?
Boy, I think I would take up the whole time of this session talking about all the different policies that the government could change. Listen, it's got to be a partnership. The regulatory regimes in a lot of country has really bogged down simply because it's been regulation built on top of regulation. And, we've seen efforts, call it red tape reduction or one regulation removed if another new one's put in. There's no easy solution for it. So the number one goal for any government is to protect its citizens from any harm. And so putting in things that protect things like data, privacy, the right not to be manipulated. Those are all things that they should be focused in on. And it gets down to the nitty-gritty regulations that should be, looked at. I think of export control regimes across the globe when, in a different era, crypto was heavily regulated. Encryption was a heavy regulated area where now if you create a new web browser, you need export controls to export your technology. And, it's resulting in hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts just sitting on tables waiting for government officials to approve it. I think taxation policy will always be very important, making sure it's smart taxation and people are paying their fair share. Not saying no taxation at all. I think governments have a duty and industry has a duty to ensure that citizens are protected and have an economic means to make a living. But there are just so many regulations that have bogged down the industry. I heard Wim mention telecom regulations here in Canada, and I look at the CRTC, and that's an organization that probably should just be exploded and started from scratch, because it was designed to deal with situations from a different time when technologies were different. And again, it goes back to my point that the technology industry as a whole has done a terrible job of explaining things, has never took the time and come to the table relatively late in terms of telling its story, telling it why it needs different changes. And so, there's that element of it. Again, I don't want to leave the impression that government should stand out of the way. I do think they should be there to protect things from antitrust issues, from overusing monopolies. But there's also what I do worry as someone who's in the public policy field is we've moved to a situation that a lot of people are calling lawfare, where we're using non-tariff trade barriers really to exclude different industries or different companies or even different countries from what is really very much an integrated global ecosystem and supply chain to really address the new technology. So my recommendation is governments do things that protect its citizens, but also do things that really help industry, because without the industry, we can't have social programs. We can't support others that may need a helping hand.
Well, thank you, Morgan. So Wim, so in this, what are the challenges the businesses are facing right now? And if you have any advice to help them navigate in this whole new era of digital economy?
Yeah, no, I think something that came, well, I guess the new era, I think we were kind of faced real time with, I guess, some of the inegalities of our digital economy, right? I think what we've seen very clearly is that COVID, or this forced digital transformation that everybody's going through, is not equal for everybody, right? So some industries are doing well, some are doing okay, and then there's a whole bunch that are not doing very well. A lot of the SMB businesses that was referred to earlier, are struggling because they weren't ready for this. How do you help them? How do you help remote communities? They're clearly not ready. If you look at all the different programs, look at all the different superclusters that are probably not properly funded. There is a clear we're happy here talking about digital economy and digital infrastructure, and it all works really well for us, but it's clearly not working very well for everybody, right? So I think there needs to be a very good look in terms of how do we address some of these gaps. How do we make this in an equal way, that it's accessible to everybody, that we help these remote communities, that we help these smaller businesses that are much more exposed. How do we help them along? But then also, as we crawl our way out of this COVID situation, that we don't go back in time, right? How do we make sure everybody stays on an equal footing? And then Chris talked about students. I mean, it's a key thing, and Ritika talked about obviously recognizing all this into some economic model. I think today a lot of this is kind of unrecognized. I think we need to make sure this is a learning moment, that we bake this into real policies and real recommendations and real actions.
Thank you, Wim. Ritika? So what are the challenges businesses are facing right now? And if you have any advice also for them?
Right. As Wim pointed out, that there are inequalities that have surfaced, especially in this COVID era, in terms of the use of digital technologies, which segment is able to use it better for its benefit and which not. There's something which is more long-term, maybe. As I would reckon, the impact of digital technologies on climate change and whether are they actually green or not, which I think needs to be addressed sooner than later. We know these data centers, they kind of consume a lot of electricity. There have been reports that the AI industry might just end up consuming 15% of world's electricity by 2025. And, because training these neural networks is going to be intensely energy intensive. And that is why we have to look that, it uses kind of renewable energy in order to power digital transformation. The industry has to come up with alternatives which actually reduce its carbon footprint. And that's one side of it. Digital technology does actually contribute in reducing the carbon footprint. Like, if you have to fly an engineer from US to Asia and back, you would be consuming a lot of carbon dioxide. And that now digital technology can actually restrict that inter-country travel. And in that way, it is, of course, furthering climate change. But of course, the energy which is consumed by making our world digital should be greener as well. And this is what I think that governments, organizations, nonprofits, academic institutions should actually, focus now, is, coming up with green technology to power digital transformation and to see where it goes from there.
Thank you, Ritika. Chris, I know you mentioned about the small and medium businesses earlier. So what are the challenges these businesses will be facing, and if you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I wanted to focus more on the advice side, just at a higher level. We should recognize this year that change is a new constant, and we're not returning to normal, whatever that means, in any time soon. And we should also remember that even if COVID-19 had not happened, the economy is always changing, and technology especially is always evolving, and there would be a change and disruption regardless of the pandemic. So that's an important point to sort of keep our minds clear and positive that if we expect change, then we'll be less likely to be upset by the change. And on a more philosophical note, just to wrap up my suggestions would be related to fostering the digital economy and healthy economy in general. I'd say that whether in our entrepreneurial endeavors, our careers, our future plans, or policy work, I think we should remember that fortune favors the bold, and we need to be positive, trust the process of this disruption, and finding a way forward, and be decisive in our decision-making and policy decisions.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for those words of wisdom. So Morgan, so what are the challenges, according to you, the business will be facing?
Well, again, I focus in on the public policy aspects of it. So there's always somewhere around the corner someone that's trying to be helpful or address an issue without looking at the unintended consequences. I kind of equate it to looking after the whole chicken. Everyone wants the good parts, but no one knows where to put the feet after they've done processing it. So making sure that they look at things properly, making sure that they do spend time. I know it's a cost center, but taking the time to inform governments where the industry is going, because quite honestly, the biggest, even if you're in an unregulated industry, the biggest impact on your business is always going to be government. That's the only thing, even in this one instance of constant change, as Chris refers to, the only thing that remains always constant is government and government involvement. So that will always continue to be a big challenge, but also, an opportunity for business to be that bridge between governments and with governments to really explain the industry as a whole.
Thank you, Morgan. So we spoke earlier about the question of accessibility. So how can we make technology more that can be benefit for everyone. So I don't know what you think about that, Wim.
So one element, and maybe this is kind of how markets tend to work, is if we the element of competition tends to drive more efficient service delivery, typically more cost effective as well, as because as we potentially allow new players to come into the market on every level. So I believe one way to address accessibility is to maybe try to be bold. We've seen that in other markets. We've seen that in European markets. We're seeing that in the Indian market. We're seeing that some in Southeast Asia. We're seeing some of that in the US market. So one way to kind of drive accessibility, obviously, let's be smart about competition. The other part also is Morgan alluded to that, is government will always be there. I think government has a mandate to look after its citizens, and they need to make sure we distribute our wealth equally. So I think it's going to be important that we help the areas in need with the right programs, with the right partners, but also making sure that we're not too prescriptive. I think the markets tends to sort out themselves. Players tend to find the open opportunities and innovate, and the companies that are not able to innovate, tend to don't stick around too long. I think we all know that. So I think it's a little bit, how to loosen up a little bit within the right constraints that we're comfortable with, without upsetting the status quo too much. But also let's not go totally overboard and give it all away to big tech. We know that's not. That has his cars as well. So a little bit of that is just trying to learn from other markets, trying to apply that in an appropriate setting, and then let some of the markets play itself out.
Thank you, Wim. Ritika, I know you've been doing a lot of work on internet accessibility in remote areas. How can we benefit? How can they make benefit to everyone?
Right. I think what we found in most of the work that the regulatory and the policy work we have done for telecommunications, and Wim really pointed out that we need to reduce, we have to think about competition, increase competition. That's one thing for sure. The broadband penetration is kind of a bedrock for making sure that technology reaches everywhere, even in the rural communities. Now, accessibility is more of a problem in northern part of Canada. And for making broadband available there, I think we did propose some of the policy measures, and one of them was infrastructure sharing mechanisms, and CRTC has been following it as well. It has been urging the incumbents to share their infrastructure to the operators who are providing services in the rural areas. So that, I think, would be very critical. CRTC, we know, has actually awarded a contract. It has approved a plan for Elon Musk's Starlink, which is going to provide internet to these rural communities through satellite. So, of course, a lot is happening to ensure that these rural communities have broadband in Canada. That's one side of supply. The other side of supply is, even if they have those technologies, they should be skilled enough to use them. So, the government as a whole, and we're not talking only about reskilling and upskilling programs in the rural areas, but generally everywhere. Government, the corporations, they have been making efforts to reskill the labor force, upskill them, to actually introduce these STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics courses, make sure that people know how to use digital technology, can make full use of it. And it would be very important, especially in terms of the rural communities, where it is very difficult for, say, the best of care health to reach with the new technologies coming up, having a very good, upload download speed and latency factors. If we know we can fix all the demand and the supply side together, we should be able to deliver the basic services like education and health to these communities without any problems. That's it.
Thank you, Ritika. Chris, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I've actually been up to the far north to Nunavut and Northwest Territories, and I can tell you it's definitely a major challenge in Canada. Down south, we've got internet as we're using today, but if you're in a town or a community up north, the downtown core might have 3G or maybe 4G if you're lucky up there. If you leave the city center, though, in many cases, my experience was you go down to zero G, so not even 2G service, which is dangerous. And also, as Ritika was mentioning, hard to supply critical services like education and employment access if you're not connected. So one thing I noticed when I was up there, just thinking of solutions, would be having, there's some maker spaces up there, some community libraries, community internet locations that people can come to from around that community and use services at a centralized location that can make use of the leading edge technology if you want to focus it in on a certain geographical location to start. So that can be one way to bring medical services, leading edge things to communities. But of course, the hardest and most important part of all of this is just investment. And there's no easy solution to that, and it takes time. So I think finding a way to sort of maximize the investment up there into certain important hubs first, and then making the tough decisions to invest in a place that doesn't necessarily make a lot of money back in the short term.
Thank you, Chris. So Morgan, how can we make technology benefit for everyone?
Yeah, just to follow up on everyone's comments on rural, remote, and underserved areas for broadband and internet, whether it be wireless broadband or fixed wireless. I think, I know as countries, we have to come to the realization that the big players aren't necessarily going to serve those areas. They have a duty to create shareholder value, return value to the shareholders, and sometimes the ROI to invest in these areas aren't really there. So what I believe one of the solutions is, and it's a little bit of back to the future. If you look at 100 or plus years ago when electricity started rolling out, and communities started creating their own electricity companies. For me, that's one of the possible solutions in terms of providing service to these areas, because it's not only a Canada North issue. You look at the United States, 40 to 50% is not served or underserved, and so it's not necessarily an issue related to one country. It's a global issue. So that's really where government could actually help to is provide some seed funding for these communities that are looking at this is a major business development activity that they could look at. So it's something I would really encourage.
Well, thank you, Morgan. So we have 5 minutes left. So just for the closing remarks, Wim, is there any last message you want to share with us?
No, I mean, I think we've kind of covered a lot of angles here. I think what we're kind of concluding to is that, we're force feeding ourselves onto it, to the digital economy. I think the digital economy turns out to be, obviously being a lot more mature than we probably, all expected it to be. We are kind of making it all work for the ones that are fortunate enough to be well connected. The fact that we're being asked to work from home, the fact that companies are making it work, the fact that we emptied the downtown, kind of clearly shows that we can make it work. There's there's interest from companies as they're forced to do it. Now, how do we make this available to everybody, right? How do we make this equal to everybody? And then the other step is how do we make this more mature? I think we are realizing that we're we don't necessarily need 5G just yet. We also know that we probably can do a lot better. We can, we need to start thinking about how to make this, a proper redundant infrastructure, maybe a kind to, the utility space, right? Internet is as important as water and electricity, or even more, right? If my family doesn't find internet, they come and complain to me, right? They're not going to complain to me if the electricity goes down or the water supply goes down, right? So I think it's we need to start taking this a lot more serious. I'm not saying that we aren't, but I think we need to make sure that we use this as a way to kind of leapfrog our services delivery. We could use as a way to kind of create wealth. We could use as a way to kind of complement the physical economy as that comes back online.
Ritika, in 1 minute, is there anything you want to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I'll be really brief. Just a couple of things which actually I want to highlight more than add, because we have discussed a lot for sure. First of all, we have to ensure, developed countries can do very well in adapting technologies and making sure that their citizens are well versed in using it. But we have to, from the global perspective, we have to look at emerging economies and make sure that digital divide does not exist and it's not as stark in the coming years. And second is, we all know what is data right now. Data is basically what oil was to the industrial era, and it's going to be a very vital resource. So I think data privacy is something that, the governments and the regulators should be really, really careful about and make sure that there are stringent laws to ensure privacy.
Chris, 30 seconds. You want to add something?
Great. And just to reiterate the importance of fostering young talent and education. So we, at the same time, we should know the trends of where technology is going in Canada and get that information into the hands of young entrepreneurs so they can make better business decisions, and encourage talent to take a jump. And in the long run, those seeds that we sow of future success will benefit everyone here in Canada.
Thank you, Chris. Morgan, the final word.
Yeah, I would just say that the future is bright. Yes, we've got a lot of issues to deal with, and issues will continue to come up that we've not foreseen, but the future is bright. We're transforming the way we work and live and play, and I look forward to really addressing those in the future with everyone on the panel.
Thank you. So that was Wim Daunt, Principal at Roland Berger, Ritika Rana, Senior Manager at Nordicity, Chris Pereira, CEO at the Canadian Ecosystem Institute, and Morgan Elliott, Vice President, Government Affairs at Huawei Technologies. And that was your session for Accelerating Global Digital Economy. And thank you very much for having us.